Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you a story about a mistake I made that had a huge impact on my life and my marriage. I didn't realize that this mistake could have such a negative effect on me. My husband caught me with his boss and didn't think twice before taking revenge on me. I take full responsibility for my actions. But I feel that my husband went too far with his revenge. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband planned everything meticulously and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm facing the consequences. My name is Patricia. I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Michael, and he's 30 years old. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but we're no longer together. We've known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. I was 15 at the time, and we practically grew up together. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you a story about a mistake I made that had a huge impact on my life and my marriage. I didn't realize that this mistake could have such a negative effect on me. My husband caught me with his boss and didn't think twice before taking revenge on me. I take full responsibility for my actions. But I feel that my husband went too far with his revenge. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband planned everything meticulously and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm facing the consequences. My name is Patricia. I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Michael, and he's 30 years old. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but we're no longer together. We've known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. I was 15 at the time, and we practically grew up together. Michael and his family moved into town at that time. Because his father had transferred for work, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. At some point, both parents got closer and made friends, but Michael and I had our own little differences and often argued over little things. Something seemed off with Michael at that time. He was not like the usual kids. He didn't like playing or associating with them. He was always reading, even when it was a holiday. To be honest, Michael was an introvert. A few months after he and his family had moved in, Mel and I got along, became friends, and spent time together whenever his family came over for dinner. We even went to the same high school and college. We never dated during that period. We were just friends. 2 years after graduating from college, Michael asked me out. I waited a while to be his girlfriend because I liked him, but I didn't want to be rejected. We weren't close friends at the time. I said yes, and we dated for a year before getting married. It was a memorable day, and I felt like it was the right decision. At the time, we were head over heels for each other. A few months after the wedding, everything was going well, and we were living happily ever after. We were just an average couple trying to figure out what we wanted from life. We planned to not take any financial assistance from our parents, and we managed to make it work. At the time, our parents' relationship became stronger because of our union. Despite everything, our relationship made us stronger. Michael was kind to me, and we went on regular dates. He also bought me gifts. He never gave me a chance to look outside the relationship or even regret marrying him. This brought us closer together. 1 year after our wedding, Michael got promoted at his office. He gave professional advice to the company he was working with. After Michael got promoted, I was made his boss's personal assistant. Everything went well, and we lived happily. I also opened a fast food restaurant with Michael's support. He helped me with the business and came over to help me out with work whenever he was free. It wasn't easy at first. The first few months were challenging, but I overcame all the challenges with Michael's help. Michael also recommended the restaurant to his colleagues who came by for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. While I was at the restaurant taking care of sales for the day, I got a call from Michael's mom, Trisha. I picked up the call and we chatted. Michael's mom and I were close. She treated me more like a daughter. It turns out Trisha gave birth to Michael and 3 other boys, so she took me in like the daughter she never had. After our usual greetings, she told me that she was trying to plan a surprise for Michael's dad's 60th birthday. She said she needed an extra hand and I was the perfect person to help her carry out the surprise. I was excited and told her how happy I was to help out. I got off the phone and headed over to the house later that day. We made the necessary arrangements, and we got everything ready for the surprise. Everyone knew about it except for Michael's dad, Dave. Trisha told us to keep it a secret, and we did. 3 days later, it was Michelle's dad's birthday. The surprise went really well. There were lots of drinks and food, and everyone came with gifts. It was a nice birthday party. Michael and I also gave him a very thoughtful gift. We all had fun. It was a wonderful night, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The party ended at 10 p.m., and everyone left the venue. My husband and I drove home together that night and went straight to bed because we had a busy day ahead. I woke up and turned to the other side of the bed, but I didn't find Mikkel as usual. He must have woken up early to go to work. I got out of bed and got ready to go to the restaurant. I did my morning routine and left home. I arrived at the restaurant and saw that there were a lot of orders waiting for us. My staff and I got to work, and we cleared the tables pretty quickly. Not long after we opened, my husband walked in with his boss, Raphael. Raphael wanted to have breakfast at the restaurant that morning. My husband's boss had come over several times to have food at the restaurant. There were times he came and had food with his clients. I was used to having him around, so I took out his order and one of my staff, Kate, served him. My husband also had breakfast with his boss. I sat at a corner and watched them eat. They were talking about business, but I didn't really understand what they were discussing. A few minutes later, they were done and ready to leave the restaurant. Raphael left a big tip for me because of how good the food was. I said no at first, but he kept asking, so I looked at my husband to see if he was okay with it. Michael didn't care, so I was really happy and thanked him for his generosity. We left the restaurant and I walked them to the car. They got in and drove off. Then I walked back into the restaurant and carried on with my work. 2 months later, it was our 3rd wedding anniversary. I got up really early that morning before Michael. I'd been planning on surprising him a few minutes later. He got up, we said hello, and wished each other happy anniversary. On our anniversary, I was really happy that he remembered, even though he was really busy. We got dressed and went to work. I left early because I wanted to surprise my husband. It was our 3rd year together. I called him and told him to come back early, which he said he would. I went home and made a nice meal. I wanted us to have dinner at home. I did everything and lit the candles. I surprised my husband with a romantic dinner date just for us. Not long after he arrived home, I waited at the door for him to come in. As soon as he opened the door, I yelled, "Surprise!" He was so happy to see that I had taken time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged and headed to the dining table. It turned out that my husband had gotten me a gift when he was coming from work. We exchanged our gifts and professed our love to each other. Then we ate our meal. Afterwards, we cleaned up. After our meal and TV, I went to bed. I couldn't watch the movie because I was tired. The next morning, I woke up and found myself on the bed. Michael must have had a hard time taking me upstairs. I thought to myself and laughed. As usual, my husband had left early for work. I decided not to go to work that day because I wanted to visit my parents. I haven't heard from them for a while. After that, I was so busy with work that I hardly had time for myself. I called Mikkel and told him I was going to see my parents. He said okay and told me to come back early, which I agreed to. I went to the bathroom, had a bath, got dressed and left. I didn't bother informing them because I was sure they were going to be at home, and I wanted my visit to be a surprise. I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes later. I got out of my car and headed to the door. I knocked a few times, but no one answered. Everything was silent, and I wondered what could be wrong. I still remembered the passcode and went inside. I got in and saw that no one was at home and everything was neatly put in place. I took my phone and called my dad, but his lines were off. I was scared and I was having some pretty bad thoughts. I called my mom, and after a few rings, she picked up. I asked her if everything was okay and why they weren't at home. She said everything was fine and not to worry. Apparently, they went to visit a friend of theirs a few miles away from the neighborhood. I was really happy that nothing had happened. I told my mom I decided to wait for them to come back. A few hours later, they arrived home. I was happy to see them, and we chatted for a while before I left and headed back home. By the time I arrived home, it was a few minutes past 6, and Michael hadn't come back. I called him, and he told me he was a few minutes away from home. I went inside and freshened up and went downstairs. I thought about the things. My mom and I had been chatting, and I felt happy that I'd had some time to think about them. I feel like I haven't done enough for them. I was thinking about the fun I'd had with my mom when Michael walked in. I was a bit startled at first because he didn't knock on the door as usual. Maybe I must have forgotten to lock it. We said hello and asked each other about our days. Then he went upstairs to change. He was in a hurry. I left too. I set his dinner and carried on with what I was doing. A few minutes later, he came down to eat and went back to the room. I was curious because it was unlike him, so I got up and asked if everything was okay. He said he was just tired from the day's work, so he came back to lie down. To be honest, he looked very tired. I also joined him in bed, and we had a rest for the night. Michael's behavior continued for a couple of weeks, and I was getting pretty tired of his mood swings. I decided to push him to tell me what was wrong. After a lot of persuasion, he told me that he'd been overworked by his boss for the past few months. I was surprised because he told me they weren't very busy at that time of year. Then he explained about them expanding their business. I could see that the work was taking a toll on my husband, so I decided to do something about it. The next day, I decided to speak to Michael's boss, Raphael. I knew I was making the decision on my own, but I needed to do something because my husband was burning out. I knew he wouldn't speak up to his boss because he loved what he did. I was in the restaurant 2 days later when Michael called me about a work trip he was going on at the last minute. I thought it would be a good chance for me to pay his boss, Raphael, a visit. I knew it was the right thing to do because it was for my husband's benefit. I quickly finished what I was doing and left for their office. I got there, and I'm always amazed by how well organized the offices are. I told his assistant I was here to see her boss, but she told me I didn't. I told her I had an appointment, but she wouldn't listen. I gave up hope and was about to leave when I saw Raphael coming out of his office with a man. I ran to him and told him I wanted to see him. I didn't have an appointment. He apologized and let me into his office. I told him about Michael's poor health and how he'd been overworking himself. Raphael put me at ease. He said he was going to cut back Michael's working hours. I was worried I'd messed up, but he told me cutting back hours doesn't mean Michael's losing his job. I was relieved because I knew Michael would be upset if he found out I'd paid his boss a visit without telling him. I asked Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael, and he agreed. He walked me out of his office with his hand on my lower back. I thought they had some sort of friendship after leaving the office. I went back home and called Michael. We talked for some time, and I found out he was feeling much better. He was extending his trip for a little while because his boss gave him time to rest. I asked why he couldn't rest at our home. He replied that he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I agreed to it because it can get really intense. Given the nature of our work, we said our goodbyes and I went to bed. Things were moving quickly. My husband was fine where he was, and my business was moving forward. I was at the restaurant when Raphael arrived with a group of men in suits. I assumed they were from his work. I asked someone to take their other, and I continued with my work. Some hours later, I thought I should leave early and go see Trisha for a while. I was about to leave when I saw Raphael still in the restaurant, but that time, he was alone. I went over to say hello, and he asked me to join him for a drink, which I accepted because I didn't want to seem rude. We talked about random things, and I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting person. He told me how he worked so hard from an early age, and because he was from a rich family, he had to work extra hard. I also told him about how Michael had worked his way up to be where he is today. I also told him it was one of the things I admired about my husband. I admired his dedication. I finished up my drink. I told Raphael I was meeting Michael's mom for dinner and I had to leave. He offered to drive me since it was late, and I accepted. We talked on the way, and I saw that I had misjudged Raphael because he was actually a very funny and easygoing guy. He was so easy to talk to. He dropped me off, and we said our goodbyes. I greeted Trisha, and she kept on saying she hadn't seen me in months. I knew she exaggerated a lot, but months. We laughed over it, and we talked. We chatted about Michael's recent trip, and she asked how I was coping without him. I told her I was doing fine. We had dinner and caught up before I went back home. When I got home, I went straight to bed and decided to talk to my parents the following day. I woke up the next day ready to get to work when Michael called to say his boss was coming over to the house to get some documents he'd left behind. I knew I was already going to be late for work and decided to wait for Roaring. I was just finishing up my breakfast when I heard the doorbell. I knew it was Raphael, so I invited him in. I gave him the documents, and he handed me my pair of earrings that I'd left in his car the night before. I thanked him and was about to lead him to the door when he begged me to make a cup of coffee for him. I agreed because he was really a nice person, and he was just asking me to do him a small favor. We continued to bond over the coffee, and Raphael kept flirting with me. At first, I never saw it as anything serious, but it just kept on coming. He could tell me I was beautiful and that Michael was lucky to have me. It never meant anything to me, though, and I decided to just let it go. A few days later, Raphael kept visiting my restaurant, and he kept on flirting with me. There were days he could come into the restaurant and sit for hours watching me work and waiting for me to finish my work. In those days, I found the sweet side of Raphael. I got into the restaurant one morning, and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raphael. It brightened my day, and a few minutes later I got a call from him. We chatted, and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband, not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raphael was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him about it. I talked to Michael about when he was coming back because I missed him, and he said he'd be back in a week. I was really excited because I thought it was finally time for him to come back, and I wouldn't be lonely again. The next day, Raphael asked how long it had been since I'd gone out for dinner. I couldn't remember, so he suggested we go out for a friendly dinner. I accepted because I thought it was harmless, and since it was going to take a few days before Michael returned, I decided to take him up on his offer. I got dressed, and Raphael picked me up. I didn't know how he knew my favorite restaurant, but I was happy to be there. We had dinner and a chat with Raphael. It was really easy to communicate because he's great at putting you at ease. I checked the time and saw that it was getting late. There were only a few people left at the restaurant. I was feeling pretty tipsy, so Raphael offered to drop me home. I had to turn him down because it was getting late, and I didn't want to be driven for too long. I told him to find me a hotel for the night, and I could go home in the morning. He suggested I could sleep in his guest room instead. I accepted, and he drove us to his house. When we arrived, I realized I was drunk because I couldn't see properly. Raphael helped me change my clothes. Before I knew it, we were kissing. I didn't know what was going on in my head, but I wanted it to happen. That was the last thing I remember before everything went blank. I woke up the next morning with a mild headache. I was in a strange place. Before I could make out where I was, I heard the voice of my husband. The next thing I knew, he was there. I was standing at the door, looking at Michael, who was looking at me pretty badly. I turned to the left and saw Raphael naked on the bed. Michael's eyes showed a lot of pain, so I knew I was in trouble. I left the room without saying anything and tried to get dressed and go after him, but Raphael held me back and told me to give him some time. I didn't think it was a good idea, so I got dressed quickly and went looking for Michael, but he'd left. I looked for a cab and went home to look for him, but he wasn't there. I kept trying. I tried to reach Michael, but he wasn't answering. A few days later, Raphael came by the restaurant. I asked him if he knew where Michael had gone, but he didn't know. I was getting irritated at that point because I wanted him to come face me and let us talk things through. A few days later, I woke up. I was ready to start my day, so I decided to put myself first for once and not think about everything. I got to work, but my restaurant was closed. I was shocked because my employees always come in early, and we don't close the restaurant at that hour in the morning. I was served a paper saying that I was in for a shock when I saw that the owner of my business had been sold. I thought it was a very good joke and started laughing because I didn't see how it was possible. I decided to call Michael because he was the only one who could understand how I was feeling, but I couldn't reach him. I called Raphael, and he came as soon as he could. I gave him the papers as quickly as I could, but my hands were shaking. Then Raphael told me that Michael, who was the legal owner of my restaurant, had sold it. I didn't want to believe him at first because I knew Michael wasn't that cruel, but I remembered what I'd done to him, and I couldn't hold back my tears. Michael had thrown work into the drain, which was the last thing you'd expect from someone in his position. When I got home, I found my things outside with Michael standing at the door with the divorce papers. I begged him to listen to me and tried to explain that the house was mine too, but he said he'd bought it. He just bought the house in his name. I can't believe he's so ruthless. I'm still trying to process everything he did to me. I've seen the comments, and I must say that you're really cruel. You made sure to crush my pride. I guess I brought it on myself. I never thought I'd end up divorced and without anything. I thought things would work out and I'd get back everything I'd lost, but it didn't happen like that. It's all gone, and it's because of my mistake at the time. I lost my restaurant, which I built with a lot of hard work and dedication, and I also lost my marriage. I was left homeless. It became clear to me that Michael was a cruel person who never thought of anybody but himself. This is everything he did to me. I don't think I can ever recover from it, but I guess karma dealt with me.